Well, thanks very much to the Gauteng Wetland Forum for this great opportunity to present to you on a project around rapidly assessing the effect of wastewater on ecosystem service supply in South Africa. And I'm going to be focusing particularly on some preliminary results from the Klip River wetland, and then also briefly touch on the Blesbokspruit wetland. And when I refer to wastewater, it's in the very broadest sense of the term. So that's taken to include domestic effluent, grey water, effluent from industry, mines, as well as urban and agricultural stormwater runoff. And as very brief background, surprisingly, there appears to have been very little work done in assessing the impacts of wastewater across a multitude of ecosystem services. So there are a lot of very focused studies, but as far as we could see, there hasn't been much work building broad pictures of the range of ecosystem services and how they're affected. So as part of a project funded by DEFRA through the JNCC, we're working on a method to rapidly assess the impact of wastewater on the supply of ecosystem services by a wetland. And this has been applied to 9 different wetlands across South Africa. The core of the method is a Bayesian network model. I'm not going to go into any detail, but just to give you a flavor of the model, and it covers 15 different ecosystem services. Those are the same that are included in wet ecoservices. And 17 attributes are used to assess these services. So by way of example, if we look at flood attenuation, we can see here that 3 key attributes affect the flood attenuation. The first would be, has the wastewater extended the hydro period? In other words, made the wetland wetter. Next, has the wastewater increased the primary productivity? That would be the vegetation growth in a wetland. Or has the effect been neutral or negative? And lastly, has the wastewater caused erosional incision into the wetland? So what you can see here is, for each of these services, there are a few attributes that are rapidly scored to give a sense of the impact. I mentioned the 9 wetlands. You can see they're spread across several provinces, and Gauteng has the 2, Klip River and Blesbokspruit. Now, these 2 wetlands share some common features, and as I think most of you are well familiar, these wetlands receive extensive discharge from wastewater treatment works and urban stormwater discharge, as well as from mines, although in both cases this is less so than was historically so. And both wetlands also support extensive reed beds, you can see here, and predominantly Phragmites australis. Also common to pretty much most of Blesbokspruit and the upper section of the Klip River is water flow which is predominantly diffuse. In other words, it's spread widely across the wetland, and wastewater has contributed to that, and also an increased level of wetness. But in contrast, in the lower portion of the clip, the immense discharge from wastewater treatment works, in combination with increased peak discharges from all the hardened surfaces in the wetland, have resulted in severe erosional incision of a deep channel throughout the length of the lower Klip River wetland. And this, together with a lowering of the groundwater, the aquifer, has resulted in partial drying out of this lower portion. And you can see in the photo on the left, this was taken in the early 2000s, where active incision is taking place into one of the few remaining diffuse flow areas. And just interestingly, this is during the dry season, and much of that flow that you can see in the photo is contributed by discharge from the wastewater treatment works themselves. So you can just get a sense that the erosive power of the stream has greatly increased compared with the natural situation. And the photo on the left is the consequence of that. You can see an incised channel, and currently this now extends throughout the entire length of the lower section of the Klip River wetland. And this has had a primary effect on the hydrology of draining the water that would otherwise have been more laterally spread. So you can see in the upper section, which is still intact, if we look at the changes that have occurred in the last 20 years, we can see there's been a slight increase in the extent of reed beds. In the lower section, though, you can see the reed bed extent has shrunk by 13%. But just importantly to note is that although on the left of the image you can see the incised Klip River channel, which, as I indicated, is having a draining effect on the reed beds, this draining effect is certainly not complete. And part of the reason that a lot of these reed beds are still remaining reasonably intact in wet is that the groundwater hasn't been dropped considerably. So there's still some contact there, although that is to be confirmed. But the other thing is there is, in several of these reed beds, significant lateral input. So you can see an example here where a tributary is providing valuable inflows for sustaining the downstream reed bed. And in some cases, wastewater itself is providing an important input, albeit with added nutrients, etc. Turning to the question now, so what are the water quality consequences of drying out of the Klip River? Now, Spike McCarthy and his team have warned of the considerable volumes of pollutants which have accumulated in the reed bed sediments of the Klip River. And this has taken place over many decades of receiving mining and urban industrial sources. And they warn that there could be extensive leakage, essentially release of these nutrients and pollutants on drying out of these sediments. And it's been estimated that if the entire Klip River wetland and all of its sediments were to become totally degraded, so that would be a complete release, the cost of remediating this downstream pollution would be in excess of 140 billion rand. It's not a small amount of money. So yeah, it's not an exaggeration to say it's somewhat of a ticking time bomb. The question that we face now is, as I indicated, that it's only the lower portion of the klip which has been partially degraded. So the key question then is really whether is there evidence of this leaking of nutrients and metals that McCarthy and team have been warning us about. So in trying to answer that question, I've been drawing here on a PhD thesis from Marara, 2018. And as part of this thesis, there was monthly sampling of water quality down the length of the Klip River. And you can see at point D is shortly upstream of the wetland. E is in that upper, which is the intact portion of the wetland. F is the lower degraded in size portion. G is at the outflow, and then H and I is downstream of the wetland. And without getting into too much of the detail of the table, but just to highlight that at the wetland outlet had the highest concentrations of phosphates. And in addition, the lower portion of the wetland had some of the highest concentrations of heavy metals. So this tends to suggest that there is some leaking of nutrients and metals from this partially impacted reed beds. Right, to summarize now very briefly, the effect of wastewater on a range of ecosystem services provided by both the Blesbokspruit, and then you see the Klip River looking at firstly its upper portion and its lower portion. And I think what's very clear here is that for the lower Klip, all ecosystem services are negatively affected. But for the upper Klip and the Blesbokspruit, okay, while the majority are negatively affected, some are positively affected, and notably carbon storage. And then for Blesbokspruit, also tourism and recreation, primarily as a result of the wastewater inputs, together with other influences, creating favorable bird habitat and very suitable areas for bird watching. So just to draw some preliminary conclusions, I'm going to be rather brief here, and starting with the Klip River wetland. So the lower Klip River wetland, as you can appreciate, has been overwhelmingly negatively affected by wastewater. And that's directly through the poor quality of inflows, but it's kind of a double whammy. Also quite profoundly by the channel incision. So there has been some drying out of the reed beds, but as you saw, they still remain reasonably intact. And I think maybe one of the most important take-home messages is there's still a lot more degradation that can take place. So the wetland is certainly not, as some predicted, it certainly hasn't reached the point of the lower portion of what we would describe as collapse. And just based on the preliminary evidence, it looks like there's some key measures that one could identify to maintain and restore these reed beds. So the first would be to protect the groundwater inputs to the wetland. Second would be the management of the lateral flows to the wetland. As indicated, those are both a source of pollutants as well as a source of water sustaining the reed beds. And then the third option would also be looking to potentially reinstate diffuse flow longitudinally in strategic locations in the wetland. Now, these, as you can appreciate, would tend to be major structures, very costly, and they would require careful selection and planning. And then lastly, we've started to pull various sources of evidence to build an overall picture of the wetland, but there's still a lot more that can be done in developing an overall integrated understanding of the Klip River. And including what I haven't touched on are things like microplastics and other emerging pollutants. And to finish this with a quick few points on the Bless book spread. So the wastewater inputs have contributed together with the damming effect of road crossings to the greatly increased level of wetness and shallow open water areas favorable for birds, as many of you are all too familiar with. Also, I think a lot of you are familiar with the issues that the wetland is continuing to adjust, though, to this introduced shallow open water. And in particular, there's ongoing colonization of these open water areas by the reeds. Then just to highlight again that for the active management of these open water areas and for the wetland more generally, it's important to recognize that a considerable amount of nutrients and pollutants have accumulated in the wetland sediments over many decades of assimilation. So it's very much the same situation as the Klip, but the difference is that the threat to that accumulated pollutant sediments is far less immediate than for the Klip. So to use the ticking time bomb analogy, the clock probably hasn't started ticking yet, but that cluster of radioactive laced nasty dynamite is no smaller than in the Klip, we could put it that way. Last quick point is that although improvements in water quality have been reported in the Bless book Spruit, and a good case has been made for removing it from the Montreux record, water quality impacts remain high. So just to end off, to acknowledge UK DEFRA and JNCC for the funding of this project. And then also several individuals. A couple of you are in the meeting today. Just thank you very much for the information that you've contributed to the assessments that we're busy with. I hope in the limited time I've given you a brief taste for the assessments, but if any of you have any additional perspectives, information, or you would like a copy of the draft assessments, we'd love you to contact us. Also, you might be interested in the overall project, and we will be doing a synthesis report on all of the 9 sites. So you will be able to see, for example, how the Klip River compares with Comferspan. Yeah, so please contact me. Thanks a lot, Mark.
Don, thanks very much. If you could just stop sharing your screen. Just pick up on that last point. Definitely to have the information available. If you would like anything distributed to the forum members, we will certainly do that on your behalf. And I think looking at the synthesis project as well would be good to see that report when it comes out at a later stage. So I think that's fantastic. I'm going to ask for questions around the table. I think it's good that we can take some. Jane, I see your hand, but I'm going to just jump in first simply because I can. Don, okay, so with regards to the Klip River and the recent green drop reports, it's not getting any better with regards to both the controlled discharge of treated wastewater and the uncontrolled discharge of wastewater through broken infrastructure that are impacting on our rivers and systems. And definitely the Klip River is one of those. So is there an acceptance that flow is not going to get better soon? With that being the case, to mitigate against the potential loss of the or drying out of the wetland, your option of saying the lateral discharge of water into the system, although expensive, could be one of the measures that could make a difference to keeping the system wet. So that, in a way, would allow the wastewater treatment works to be involved in funding their discharge instead of out of one direct point. They could spread it over a larger area. I mean, obviously it's contentious, but if it's not going to get better in the country with regards to discharges, then we have to look at how we can best utilize that water, even though you say it's in a poor quality state.
Yeah, Mark, it really is quite a challenge, and I think and two points to respond to you. I think in terms of, let's say, because there are some formal discharge from wastewater treatment works that are coming in laterally, the wetland is already pretty loaded, and so it should really be only seen as a polishing effect that it would be doing, but I think in return, in helping to keep those sediments and their metals, which accumulated over many decades, in helping them to keep saturated, it will help release, will at least slow down or prevent that release of all of those pollutants. But I think, yeah, realistically, um, one should not expect more than the sort of end polishing of, yeah, of the wastewater treatment works. It's not a substitute. Yeah.
Thanks, Don. Jane?
Morning, Mark, and thanks. Morning, Donovan. I was just interested to see that you felt that the wastewater discharges had both a positive and negative effect on the biodiversity of the Blesbokspruit um, through increased reed beds. Because in my perspective, increased reed beds actually have a negative effect. I look after the Korsman Bird Sanctuary. I'm the chairperson of the Korsman Conservancy. We're in Benoni, and it is part of the Blesbokspruit catchment. We found all the sewage spills that come into Korsman and the explosion of the reed beds. We found it actually reduced biodiversity because the reeds, they get into the grassland, they destroy all the open water. So you are actually, it becomes dominated then by your reed dwelling birds, and there's no space anymore for your dabbling birds and your waders. So in that way, we found it actually reduced biodiversity, by removing the habitat for, of the open water. And, they've actually, you can see those long black stripes on the aerial photos of the Blesbokspruit where they have spent, a lot of money actually trying to spray the reed beds. I know that these long black stripes, that's actually the second time they've gone to try and remove the reed beds. And then when you do have your open water remaining, then your nutrients then are feeding the hyacinth, which in its own way destroys habitat. Which is certainly in Benoni, it's a major problem. You don't even know there's Benoni lakes anymore because they're just covered in hyacinth, and then there's no birds, and that traps the litter. So, that's another negative effect on the biodiversity. Then we found that certainly at Korsman with high water levels, because we suffer from not only sewage leaks, but municipal water leaks, which, makes the area wetter, but then the reeds are just, encroached into the grassland. So, it destroys more habitat in that way as well. And then, that I'd say that negatively impacts on tourism, all this increased reed beds. And then the other thing is that the effect, nobody ever talks about the fish. We only talk about the birds, but things like carp has got a huge damaging effect on the environment. And I've only learned about this as a non-professional we've been going through a carp control program at Korsman. But poor water quality, it encourages the coarse fish such as carp because they're the only ones who can survive in it. And, once they get past just over a kilogram in size, then nothing can catch them, and they just destroy the place. So it's, I wouldn't mind seeing fish being talked about more in terms of wetlands, but it's certainly an effect of poor water quality from wastewater. So I just thought I'd offer my perspective based on my experience here of looking after Korsman. Maybe you could just consider that in future when from a different perspective. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. I'm sorry I had to rush through very quickly on the Blesbokspruit, and the point you make is totally true, and I agree with you in terms of an area that's becomes totally dominated with Phragmites. Yeah, would have a negative effect on the biodiversity. What the point that I was trying to make, and yeah, didn't have time to really flesh it out, was that the wastewater, and one can go back to even the 1970s, in combination with the road embankments, contributed to that open water. So it was positive in that sense. But then, yeah, I do totally agree with you that once the reed beds impinge, and certainly once it's fully occurs, then one does lose habitat for the dabbling birds and a whole suite of species. So it is a challenge. And yeah, the point you make on the fish, yeah, is something that we hadn't considered either. But yeah, so I guess just one thing to add is that one has trade-offs with ecosystem services. So it may be, for example, that in terms of water quality, the reed beds would be more advantageous. And it's really, I think, as you're all too familiar with, is trying to create a mosaic of habitats, is to keep those open water areas while at the same time having sufficient reed beds to fulfill water quality functions. But yeah, thanks for your point, particularly around the alerting us to the fish dimension. Thanks.
Don, is the opportunity to rehabilitate that head cut erosion nick point still a viable option, leaving out the cost in concept from a purely wetland functionality point of view and trying to rehabilitate some level of raising the groundwater, the water table level in the wetland to at least wet that large upper section? Is there still merit in trying to rehabilitate and build some sort of gabion wall at that point? Or are we just going to look at it and say, thank goodness it got stuck at that point and it's not going to migrate further up in the system?
Yeah, Mark, I haven't looked at it closely, but I do know there are, for example, there's some natural controls. So within the wetland, there at some points it hasn't incised as deeply as others because the geological control is shallower. And so there may be scope for working on building some of those natural controls, just amplifying their effect. So I think, yeah, there certainly would be opportunity, but I guess it's really as part of an integrated initiative where one's focusing particularly on the lateral inputs as well, and over pumping from the aquifer. But yeah, I certainly think there's also place for probably some well selected few major structures. Yeah.
Thanks, Don. Any other questions around the table before we step off this presentation? Don, just before we let you go, I have got your presentation. I'll distribute it if you're okay with that to the forum members.
Yes. Yeah. Please feel free to send a PDF around.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I will do so. Thank you very much. Don, thanks very much for your time today. Appreciate the presentation, and knock on the door in the next while if you have anything you want to add or share with the forum or are looking for some more input into the project. Please just contact us and we'll get in touch with the forum members on your behalf. But thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Mark.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and thanks everyone. Yeah.
Thanks, Don. Right. Moving on to our second presentation for today. Andrew, if you're ready to give us your presentation and update on Clipsa, Clipwas, Clip whatever, Clip everything, Clip. Please go ahead and we'll take it from there. I see your presentation is coming through. I'll give you a shout when it's there. Stuck on the screen. There we go. And it's in presentation mode. Thanks, Andrew. If you'd like to take us through your presentation.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thank you for this opportunity to update everybody on what's happening on the Klip River. And Donovan, thank you for your presentation. I think it's actually interesting we've got both of them together, because I found it extremely interesting, particularly your last point regarding possible selected points, which is something we've been advocating for a while, and on an integrated basis. So thank you for that presentation, and I'll get you to come and present to our Klipwas crowd, hopefully in October. But we'll speak about that. But yeah, thanks very much. We've had quite a lot happening with Klipsa and Klipwas. I think shared previously that we had restructured strategically. Klipwas has become an operational arm of Klipsa, and our focus is on the Klip River and the Klip River catchment. And what I'd like to share with you today is where we are up to and what we are focusing on. So hopefully people can get involved and contribute and become part of our journey towards, as Donovan has been saying, hopefully protecting that wetland. I don't think I need to go into the detail of the biodiversity richness. Everybody's very aware of the South and how important it is. And Klipsa was established in 2010 to protect, promote, enhance the value of these natural assets and take a proactive approach towards development. Now, our focus, let me just get where's that pointer option? Let's get that one. Our focus is in the Upper Vaal area, and particularly the two catchments that affect the southern areas of Johannesburg. Donovan was talking about this stretch of the Klip River wetland along the southern reaches, but the river starts right up into the Bosmont area, the national watershed, and in the center of Joburg, the southwestern quadrant, and runs through old mining areas, through residential, industrial areas, coming past Lenasia, and then out towards the south. And that gives us a most important role in terms of recognizing the importance, as emphasized by Donovan, of this wetland area. The south has got, as Joburg identified, large areas